How would you like to have April the 15th as just another spring day? How would you like not to have to keep up with all those shoebox filled with receipts for your taxes? Wouldn't you love to get your entire paycheck rather than just part of it? And get rid of the IRS completely? End the 35,000 lobbyists on Capitol Hill who are trying to shake down only 535 members of Congress? We could do it enacting the fair tax. The fair tax is just that. It's fair, it's flatter, it's finite, it's family friendly. And I think it may be one of the best ideas to help bring jobs and business back to America and empower people at all levels of the economic spectrum. I'd love to know what you think.
Everybody, gather round. I'm here to give you anything you like. You want free college, energy, mortgages, whatever you like. You have come to the right place. Why? I'll tell you why. Who can take your money?
Who can take your money?
With a twinkle in their eye.
A twinkle in their eye.
Take it all away and give it to some other guy. The government.
The government.
The government can.
The government can.
And who can tax the sunrise?
Who can tax the sunrise?
Who can tax the trees?
Who can tax the trees?
Let you run a business and collect up all the fees. The government.
The government.
Oh, the government can.
The government can.
And the government can, 'cause they mix it up with lies and make it all taste good.
Make it all taste good.
The government takes everything we make to pay for all of their solutions. Healthcare, climate change, pollution. Throw away the Constitution. And who can give a bailout?
Who can give a bailout?
Tell us to behave.
Tell us to behave.
And make the founding fathers roll over in the grave. The government.
The government.
Oh, the government can.
The government can.
And the government can, 'cause they mix it up with lies and make it all taste good.
Make it all taste good.
The government takes everything we make. They're power hungry and malicious. Their economics are fictitious. Soon we'll have to eat our dishes.
Delicious.
Oh, who can be a failure?
Who can be a failure?
In so many ways.
In so many ways.
And instead of getting fired, hey, we'll give ourselves a raise. The government.
The government.
Oh, the government can.
The government can.
And the government can, 'cause they make it up with lies and make it all taste good.
Make it all taste good.
And your Uncle Sam can, 'cause he mixes it with lies and makes it all taste good.
Makes it all taste good.
And I feel so good, 'cause the government says I should.
Governor Huckabee, you have been one of the strongest and most persuasive proponents of the so-called fair tax. And it is, I must tell you, every town hall meeting I have, there's somebody that shows up with a t-shirt on, and there's enormous groundswell for it. How do you answer the criticism that a flat-out just sales tax wouldn't cause lower income Americans more of the pain and the burden of running our government and paying for its operations? How do you respond to that particular criticism of it? And also, how do you account for the resonance that this proposal has gotten throughout the nation?
Well, the reason that it's getting resonance is because people would love to see the IRS abolished. They know, as Dr. Phil might say, we've had it since 1913. How's that working out for us? It's not working out so well. The fact is, we're penalized for productivity in this country. The harder you work, the more you earn, the more the IRS and the government wants from you. What the fair tax does is says, we want you to earn, we want you to save, and we want you to buy things and sell things and make a profit. Republicans ought to embrace the fair tax, as should Democrats, because it stops this nonsense and goes to the common sense of the idea that we should encourage people to work and to get something for it. Now, on the bottom end of the spectrum, here's the thing. A lot of people have never read the entire fair tax, because when I first heard about the fair tax, a consumption tax, quite frankly, it sounds like it would be oppressive and regressive to the poor. The poor come out best of all because of the provision in the fair tax called the prebate, in which every American each month is given the amount of the fair tax back up to the level of poverty. Everybody gets it, not just those under the level of poverty. It actually untaxes the poor, untaxes the elderly. It makes sure that we don't end up paying taxes on groceries and medicine and the basic necessities of life. And for each third of the economy, there is a benefit, about a 14% benefit for those at the bottom, those in the middle about a 7%, even those at the very top end of the economy end up with about a 5% benefit. Everybody gets in the economy. No more underground economy. Drug dealers, prostitutes, pimps, gamblers, non-Republicans. All of those people out there will be paying taxes. Nobody's working under the table. And so you have now a broad base on which you're receiving the money, and it's a completely different transparent tax system as opposed to the one now where about 22% of our products we buy, the tax is hidden into it. Corporations don't pay tax. They build that cost in, pass it on to the consumer. And what's killing the American economy is that embedded tax and the invisibility of the tax. That's why I support the fair tax. I want to put the IRS out of business.
Governor, there's a real issue of enforceability. I want to ask a follow-up. The Citizens for Tax Justice say that 93% of Americans, in effect, pay less than 15% tax right now. You're imposing a 30% sales tax. How does that help the 93% of Americans who are paying 15% or less right now?
Well, first of all, Tim, it's a 23% if we were to break even. And they're not paying 15%. That's in their visible tax in the terms of the takeout from their checks. When you include the built-in tax, the embedded tax in the products we buy that corporations build in, the average American is paying 33% in his or her taxes. The average American is working through the month of May just to pay off the government. It would be a dramatic difference if the taxpayers got to choose the taxes, which they would do under the fair tax. I think most of us realize that there's got to be a better system. The one we have now is irreparably broken. It's chased jobs. Now we have $12 trillion of working capital moved offshore because our tax system has chased it away.
In 1995, FairTax.org assembled a team of leading economists that span the ideological and political spectrum. They conducted extensive economic and market research in order to devise a simpler and more efficient tax system that would unleash the potential of the U.S. economy and help every working American create wealth. The result of this effort is H.R. 25 and its companion, S-25, the Fair Tax Plan. The fair tax is a simple federal retail sales tax. Nationwide polling shows that when people have even a basic understanding of the fair tax, they overwhelmingly support it, regardless of political affiliation. They favor it over the current system and all other alternatives.
The fair tax can probably best be described as a tax replacement plan. We're going to take the federal income tax in all its forms. That includes the corporate income tax, the personal income tax, the payroll tax, gift and estate taxes, all federal income-based taxes, and we're going to replace all those with one single tax called the fair tax. The fair tax is a consumption tax. That means instead of taxing income, what we earn, it's going to tax what we spend. We're very familiar with those. We pay sales taxes, and this is going to be a form of a national sales tax. I say form of a national sales tax because there are different ways to enact a national sales tax. So the fair tax is a specific kind of national retail sales tax. It's different than other sales taxes for a couple of reasons. First of all, it has no exemptions, exclusions, deductions. It's a pure sales tax. We've designed it so that it raises the same amount of money under the fair tax as is raised today under the income tax. We call that revenue neutral. So the same amount of money is going to be collected by the federal government that's collected today. We also want to make sure that the fair tax is not regressive. Regressivity is a phrase that talks about people at the lower income levels being taxed too highly, and some people think that sales taxes are regressive, and they can be. But you can fix that, and the fair tax has fixed that. The way it did this is through a prebate system, and that means that every American will get the amount of tax, sales tax, that they will pay on essential goods and services in advance of having to spend that money. So that makes the sales tax, the fair tax, progressive, which means the more you spend, the more you're going to pay in tax. And lastly, I need to emphasize that the reason why we would do this, besides the obvious reasons of simplicity, the federal income tax is terribly complex and burdensome and intrusive, the main reason to do this is because the fair tax is pro-growth. It is going to give a huge boost to our economy. It's going to create jobs and economic opportunity for America. It's by far the best way to collect taxes. So we are strongly in favor of a tax system that's fair, that's transparent, that's simple and non-intrusive, and the fair tax meets those criteria.
Since each of us has control over what we buy and when we buy it, we control how much tax we pay and when we pay it. The rich will still buy expensive luxury items and are taxed accordingly. But under the fair tax, the middle class is better able to manage their tax burden. The fair tax is designed to be revenue neutral. A tax of 23 cents out of every dollar spent provides dollar-for-dollar revenue replacement. This funds the government and Social Security at exactly the same level as the current system. Social Security and Medicare benefits remain unchanged under the fair tax. The only difference is that they are funded from a more stable revenue source with a far broader base.
Consumption is actually a more reliable source of revenue than income. Our current tax system obviously is based on income, and so fluctuations in income will change the amount of money that the federal government is able to collect. Consumption over time, if you look at it historically, is actually more consistent than income. So basing a tax on consumption, if one is worried about consistency and the government being able to fund itself on an ongoing basis, is actually a better one to use. "45 states today, in fact, already collect sales taxes. Two of the biggest economies in the world, the states of Texas and Florida, have sales taxes primarily as their tax collection mechanism. So the great thing about the fair tax is that we can do away with the IRS. We don't have to have a national tax collection agency. We'll let the retailers collect the sales tax just like they do today. It'll be another line item on their tax collection. They're actually paid a fee to do that, so there's no burden on the retailer. They send that money to the state. The state gets a fee also for collecting that, and they send that on to the United States Treasury. So there is a very good tax collection system in place, and think about the advantages of never having to file a tax return, a personal tax return again, but simply paying your tax as you go about your business purchasing goods and services. Well, there's a number of ways to answer that. I think the easiest way is just to do a little bit of simple math. The lowest tax rate today, if you're in an income tax bracket, is 15%. That's the lowest income tax bracket you can be in. And then you're going to pay another 7.65% on your payroll tax, assuming you're just counting the employee part of that. So that's 23%. So it seems to me that the lowest tax rate a working American is paying today is the same tax rate that everybody will pay under the fair tax, which is 23%. And by the way, we're comparing the right tax rates, the tax-inclusive rates of 23 today versus 23 in the fair tax. Many people, of course, if you do better financially, are going to pay a lot higher rates than 23 today, but that's the lowest rate. So on average, people are going to pay lower rates under the fair tax. How can that be? Well, and raise the same amount of money? Because we're taxing consumption. Consumption is just a lot bigger pool of money to tax than income. So we're going to pay, as a society, the same amount of taxes, but we're going to be able to pay lower tax rates on an individual basis under the fair tax. It is a 23% sales tax. Some people say it's really a 30% sales tax. Yes, it is. It's also a 30% tax. Well, how can it be both? Well, how can a football field be 100 yards and 300 feet? Because it's a different way to measure it. You can measure sales taxes in a tax-inclusive rate, yards, or tax-exclusive rate, feet. And the difference is, if I go to the store and I spend $1 under a fair tax world, 23 cents of that is going to be tax. It's 23% of the dollar. If I go to the store and I have an item that's $1, they're going to multiply it by 0.3, 30%, and I'm going to pay $1.30. 30 cents of $1.30 is 23%. It's just a different way to count the number. Why did we use 23%, not 30%? Because we're going to replace an income tax, which is measured in the yards version, or the tax inclusive. So I want to compare a sales tax rate under the fair tax with an income tax in the same way of talking about the numbers. So that's why we typically use 23. If you want to compare it to a sales tax rate, typically tax exclusive, we use the 30% rate. So both are correct, and there's no effort to be confusing. We're actually trying to be fair to compare the rate the right way.
23 cents from every retail dollar may sound high, but this simply reflects today's federal tax revenues. Under the fair tax, government spending is made visible for the first time. Indeed, when people see the tax on their retail receipts, they may begin to question government spending more seriously than we do today. Nevertheless, 23% is less than most people pay today in federal taxes. Consider that most people fall at least into the 15% income tax bracket, and all wage earners pay 7.65% in payroll taxes. That's almost 23% right there, without taking into account the 7.65% employer matching or any of the other federal taxes we must pay. It's worth repeating, under the fair tax, most people pay less in federal taxes than they do today. Those who spend at twice the poverty level, for example, pay a tax of only 11.5%, a much lower rate than the income and payroll taxes they pay today. Because the fair tax broadens the economic base for collection, generally less is required from each taxpayer in order to raise the same amount of money. And the fair tax doesn't require any of us to spend one more dime figuring out how much tax we owe. We would never have to file an income tax return again. April 15th would be just another spring day.
The fair tax is progressive, and the reason why it's progressive is because of the prebate. We make sure that no taxpayer pays the fair tax on essential goods and services. That means that the first dollar of fair tax that you pay is on the first dollar you spend after essential goods and services. And when you think about it, if a very wealthy person spends $10 million this year and gets a prebate of $4,500, and another person spends $30,000 this year and gets a prebate of $4,500, clearly the person spending the $10 million, even though he's getting the prebate, is going to spend a huge proportion. 23% of $10 million minus $4,500 is a huge amount of taxes. That's a very progressive system. And the great thing about the system, it is totally transparent. There's no gaming, there's no tax lawyer or accountant that a wealthy person can pay to get them out of paying their fair share of taxes. It's definitely progressive. They're going to pay that tax on everything they spend above the poverty level.
The family consumption allowance is a monthly check sent in advance to pay the tax on any purchases up to the federal poverty level, a prebate. Combining the prebate with the elimination of payroll taxes, the fair tax, in effect, untaxes the poor. As the number of people in the family rises, the amount of the prebate rises. The family consumption allowance is helpful to every American household, especially seniors and others on fixed incomes.
The prebate is a system designed to ensure that no American pays taxes on essential goods and services. And this is important because it will make sure that the sales tax, the fair tax, is progressive, meaning that as people spend more, they're actually going to pay more taxes. The prebate works like this. We take the HHS, Health and Human Services, federal government poverty level, and we say no American should pay sales tax on anything up to that level because that's the bare necessities to live. Now, the way we accomplish them not paying tax on that is to simply send them the amount of tax on that amount, poverty level, 23% of the poverty level, and we send them that money. They have it in their pocket, therefore when they go shop, they've already paid the tax, been paid for the tax, and they'll go ahead and pay it at the cash register, and when it runs out, they're now up to the poverty level. Every next dollar is now taxed. It's a better way to do it, or a simpler way to do it, than trying to have someone at the cash register confirm that this person is buying an essential good and service. That would be a very difficult way to do it. So the prebate is simply a more straightforward way to make sure that no American pays taxes on essential goods and services. You also asked, how are we going to ensure that people don't cheat that system? Because the prebate grows with family size. If you have a family of 10, we're going to assume that it takes you more money to get to the basic necessities than a family of 1, and that's obvious and true. Well, that's all tied to Social Security numbers. So if you're going to claim the prebate for a family of 10, you need to have 10 valid Social Security numbers for your family. These are typically audited today to make sure they're actually human beings for a number of other programs, and that's the way it would work under the fair tax. The prebate is not an entitlement system. In fact, it's the exact opposite. What it does is it mitigates the tax that you are going to pay on essential goods and services. So instead of getting a benefit, somebody is actually giving you the tax that you are going to pay in the future in advance. So no, it's in no way a massive entitlement program. It's simply a way to make sure that no one pays tax on essential goods and services. It's completely fair that every person in the economy get the same rebate. No one will pay tax on the essential goods and services up to the poverty level. So the multimillionaire will get, if he's got a small family, will get a $4,500 rebate, and a middle class or a poor person will get $4,500 rebate. They all will get it. But the rich person is going to pay a huge amount of taxes that year because they're going to spend so much more money than the middle class or the lower income person. Well, you have to take each one of those schemes and look at them individually, but in a broad sense, the fair tax is the simplest, it's the most transparent, it's the fairest, it produces the lowest marginal rates, and it produces the highest growth for our country. It's also the least expensive plan that's been devised. So in any attribute you want to discuss, the fair tax is the best of all those plans. The fair tax is far superior to the flat tax for a tax reform system for the United States for a number of different reasons. The flat tax keeps a lot of the hidden taxes that we have in our tax code today. We want a tax code, ideally, that's very transparent. We want to see all the taxes we pay. And the flat tax includes in it the payroll tax and the corporate income tax. Well, the corporate income tax we pay in the price of all our goods and services. It's hidden, so it's not very transparent. The payroll tax is regressive, and it's a tax on work. So any good tax plan ought to be transparent. Let us see the taxes. The flat tax doesn't meet that criteria. It ought to be fair, and it ought to not tax work, savings, and investment. And the flat tax, although it has many good attributes and is clearly better than the current income tax system, is not close to being as good as the fair tax for the United States.
The value-added tax increases hidden taxes, taxes which place the heaviest burden on those least able to afford them. The flat tax simply strips out the progressive aspect of the income tax. It does not free U.S. exports from tax or impose any tax burden on imported goods. And the flat tax can easily revert back into a graduated income tax. Neither of these alternatives is as simple to administer nor as efficient at funding the government as the fair tax. Neither eliminates our regressive payroll taxes or returns us to a constitutional prohibition of the income tax.
The value-added tax is a tax that is tacked on at every stage of production. And what that means is that the VAT tax will be hidden in the cost of the things you buy. For instance, today we have a corporate income tax that's hidden in the cost of everything we buy. We don't know really how much it is in the cost of what we buy, and that's not good. It's not transparent. A VAT is like a triple or quadruple corporate income tax. It's added on all the stages of production. So when General Motors buys steel or rubber or glass to make the automobile, they're paying taxes on each of those stages, and then at the very end, when we buy the car, we're paying the sum total of all those taxes. VAT taxes are particularly bad because they're hidden from us, and they can be raised, and we never know it. It just looks like inflation to us, and we have no idea it's actually the tax system. So a VAT is something we really want to avoid. The fair tax is an incredible boost to the U.S. economy in a number of different ways. One, it removes 90% of the compliance costs that we all pay today to comply with the federal income tax, and those compliance costs have been estimated into the $250 billion or $270 billion range. So those are largely gone under the fair tax. Second of all, imagine the growth we'll have when we untax savings and investment and work and productivity. The income tax taxes all those, the fair tax untaxes all those, so the benefit to our economy in terms of economic growth is going to be huge. Interest rates are going to go down. Why is that? Well, when people are not taxed on savings, they'll save more, and as you save more and more money is in that big pool, the cost to borrow that money goes down. So both for businesses and consumers, interest rates will go down, and that's very helpful, obviously, to economic activity. And then another great reason is the effect on international trade. When U.S. businesses are no longer taxed when they send goods overseas, and we don't tax companies that produce here, we're going to have a tremendous benefit on our international trade and also on the number of businesses who want to locate in the United States to produce goods and services.
Shifting the tax base from what people produce to what they consume begins to stimulate the economy almost immediately. Work by Harvard economist Dale Jorgensen shows a quick 9 to 13% increase in our gross domestic product. Boston University economist Lawrence Kotlikoff predicts a 7 to 14% increase. Even the National Retail Federation, which is opposed to the fair tax, shows the economy would be 1 to 5% larger. This growth is fueled by several factors that only happen under the fair tax. The first of these is the removal of hidden taxes. Over 20% of the cost of goods or services is actually hidden taxes passed on to consumers. Businesses today pay taxes on labor as well as on raw materials, capital equipment, and almost everything that goes into the manufacture of goods and creation of services. When all these taxes are removed, the cost of producing goods and services drops. Removal of compliance costs drops the cost of doing business even further. Some companies may be inclined to keep these savings themselves, but competition doesn't allow that to happen. As forward-thinking businesses reduce prices to increase market share, competition drives prices down across the board. The fair tax allows exports to be sold tax-free, enabling American companies to export more competitively. Imported goods are taxed the same as domestically produced goods when they are sold here. American producers compete more effectively with foreign producers both at home and overseas. The U.S. becomes the most attractive country in the world for business and investment. International investors seeking lower taxes on their income relocate here. U.S. dollars now invested abroad flood home. During the 1980s, when marginal tax rates in the U.S. were reduced from 70% to 28%, roughly $1/2 trillion of capital flowed into the country. Boston University economist Lawrence Kotlikoff estimates the fair tax raises the stock of U.S. capital by 13% in the near term and by as much as 83% over the long term. As capital flows into the U.S., interest rates drop, spurring the growth of the economy even faster. Businesses are able to increase productivity by investing more capital per worker, and increased productivity drives up real wages. Demand for workers increases, and jobs stop migrating overseas. New plants are built with American labor. Much of the equipment installed is American-made, and American workers employed in these plants produce increasing amounts of goods for both domestic and foreign markets.
The middle class is affected like really any other subgroup in the economy. They are exempt from sales tax on purchases up to the poverty level, and then after that they pay the fair tax on their consumption. The more they save and invest, the less tax they pay. Think about it. For the first time in history, you're actually going to be able to control your tax burden by your behavior. If you're thrifty, you can pay less taxes. If you want to spend all your money, you're going to pay more taxes relative to the next person. But it no longer depends on your income. It depends on your behavior. It's actually a great advantage for seniors, and there's a number of reasons why. The first reason is that many seniors, like many of the rest of us, are saving for our retirement, expecting not to support ourselves solely on Social Security. So we save in tax-deferred retirement plans, 401ks, pensions, IRAs. And the deal is that we don't have to pay tax on the money when we save it, but we have to pay the tax when we take it out. That's generally a good deal because we get to build up that savings tax-free. Well, the great news for seniors and the huge benefit for seniors that have any one of these programs is that all the taxes under the fair tax are removed on those savings. So they get to take all that money out tax-free, when as before they would have had to pay an income tax on it. Now, other seniors either don't have those tax-deferred retirement accounts or maybe counting more on Social Security. A lot of people are unhappy to find out when they retire and begin to draw Social Security that their Social Security benefits are actually taxed. And the fair tax will remove that tax on those benefits. Keep in mind, for lower income seniors who perhaps are on Social Security, they still get the prebate, so they may pay no income tax at all under the fair tax. When you combine their Social Security benefits with their prebate, they may be completely tax-free. Also, we abolish all gift and estate taxes, so seniors can pass on their assets tax-free to their kids or their grandkids. All the complexities of the tax estate planning and trying to figure out how to maximize what you have accumulated all your life and pass it on, all that goes away. It's your money, your assets, you do whatever you like with it. So in the studies that we've done, actually all demographics that we can study come out better under the fair tax, but seniors actually benefit disproportionately well under the fair tax. In terms of their benefits, nothing. This law has no ability to change how Social Security or Medicare is paid out. Those are unchanged. And in fact, the only thing it really changes is it puts them on a more solid foundation to be funded. And what I mean by that is instead of funding out of the payroll tax, which is narrow, it'll just be funded out of the entire tax collection of the federal government. The fair tax will just get dumped into one pot, and Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are paid out of that pot. That's a little better way to fund it. Let me emphasize, though, that if there's a shortfall in Social Security or Medicare, Congress is going to have to deal with that problem because the fair tax is going to collect exactly the same amount of money when it's instituted as the current income tax does today. Your current retirement plans that are tax deferred, meaning you got to not pay taxes when you contributed to it and expected to pay tax when you got them out, and that's generally the 401ks and the pension plans. Everyone who has one of those just got a huge increase in the amount of savings that they can use in retirement because we are no longer going to tax those under the fair tax when you remove that money. So it's a huge benefit to all these big retirement plans. Well, savings rates in the United States are going to go up when we untax savings. It's a kind of a old rule in the economics that if you tax something, you get less of it, and if you untax it, you tend to get more of it. So if you untax savings, you're going to have higher savings rates. What does that do for the economy? Two main things. Number one, it gets capital formation up, which means we have a lot more money flowing in our economy, and number two, that pushes interest rates down. People can borrow to buy homes and cars, and businesses can borrow to expand and create jobs. Really nothing happens to tax-free bonds. Today, tax-free bonds are an unusual animal in that they're a way you can save tax-free in the short term. Well, under the fair tax, all savings instruments are going to be like tax-free bonds. So the real effect is not on the tax-free bonds, it's on all the other ways we can save will now become tax-free like the tax-free bonds. So every investment and savings instrument will be like a tax-free bond in the fair tax world. I think, on the contrary, the fair tax is going to be one of the biggest accelerators of people able to purchase homes. I mean, when you think about the home mortgage deduction, what the home mortgage deduction says is that you can deduct the interest you pay on your mortgage from your income taxes. You can lower your income taxes by the amount that you paid on the interest for your home mortgage. Under the fair tax, you can deduct your principal and your interest payments from your income tax payments. In fact, since your income tax is zero, it all goes away. It's like a supercharged home mortgage deduction. You get to pay your whole mortgage payment pre-payroll tax and pre-income tax dollars. It's a fantastic system for home buyers. But one of the biggest advantages has nothing to do with the home mortgage deduction. It has to do with how much faster under the fair tax you can save for a down payment. When you talk to people, first-time home buyers, what's preventing them from getting a home is a down payment and an interest rate, a mortgage interest rate. Both of those are going to improve dramatically. Interest rates are going to be lower because savings are no longer taxed, and since they have their whole paycheck, they're going to be able to save for their down payment much faster. So if I were in the home building business or a realtor or a home mortgage company, I would prepare for a huge acceleration of activity in that sector.
A major concern in any tax reform effort is what happens to mortgage interest deductions. The easy answer is that with no income tax, there's nothing to deduct from. But the fair tax has positive effects on residential real estate far beyond this narrow question. With raw materials and labor no longer taxed, home building costs are lowered, allowing competition to drive prices down. Likewise, mortgage interest rates are estimated to drop about 25%. So while homeowners cannot deduct interest, borrowers pay a much lower interest rate and have to borrow less because houses are less expensive. People are taking home their whole paychecks, so they're able to save for a down payment much faster. They are also able to make a higher monthly payment. And with a fair tax, there are no estate taxes if a home is passed on to the next generation, and no capital gains taxes if it is sold. The same is true with a farm, ranch, or other family business.
Actually, no. There's a great dynamic tension between rewarding savings and investment so that people want to save and invest, and then as they save and invest more and interest rates go down and prices go down, then they begin to consume. And the same thing happens in today's economy. When interest rates go down, when home mortgage rates go down, there tends to be more economic activity, and as they tend to go up and people will become more conservative, if they are normal business and consumer cycles, they will continue, but in a fair tax environment, they will continue without the burden of taxing income and savings and investment and productivity. A sales tax is actually more enforceable and harder to cheat than our current income tax system. And this is for a number of reasons, and they kind of make common sense when you think about them. First of all, a sales tax is it takes two to cheat a sales tax, someone not to collect and someone not to pay it. A lot of people, an income tax, you can cheat by changing a number on a tax form in the privacy of your own home, sending it in, and just making a bet that you're not going to get audited. And it is impossible to audit adequately the number of tax returns we have today, well over 100 to 140 million tax returns today. A fair tax cuts the number of tax returns by 90%. So if you have a lot fewer returns to watch, collecting the same amount of money, it's much easier to police a sales tax. Second of all, cheating is incentivized by tax rates. If it's a very high tax rate, there's a higher incentive to cheat. If it's a low tax rate, there's a lower incentive to cheat. The fair tax has lower rates on average than the income tax. Therefore, you get less every time you cheat a sales tax, so the incentive actually goes down a little bit. Third of all, to cheat a sales tax and really get money, you have to cheat on a pretty big item. You can't cheat on a pack of cigarettes or a pack of gum on a sales tax world and really get a lot of benefit. You'd have to cheat on a really large scale, and it's really hard to buy a black market house. The amount of tax gained on most purchases is low, so cheating has a low marginal benefit for the possible punishment, which is tax fraud. So the sales tax is definitely more enforceable than the income tax. The income tax today is riddled with not only inefficiency but outright cheating. We know a lot of people today simply don't file an income tax return, and under the fair tax, you don't have to file an income tax return. You're going to pay the tax every time you go to the corner store and buy something. The great thing about the fair tax is it will bring in many sectors of our economy that are not currently paying taxes. And the way that it does this is that it really doesn't depend on how you got your money. You could have gotten it illegally, you could have gotten it in any possible way, but the fact is when you go down the street and you spend your money, you're going to be taxed on it. It's the system which is the broadest possible net to capture tax income from Americans. And the income tax simply cannot have the coverage and will never have the coverage of a sales tax in terms of capturing not just cheating, not just willful non-payment, but oftentimes people just aren't complying correctly because the tax law is so complex, and they would actually want to pay what they owe, but they're not because of the complexity of the tax code. So the fair tax takes care of all those.
The IRS estimates uncollected taxes from non-filers and tax cheats amount to more than $345 billion a year. This does not include the underground economy of criminal activity. Non-compliance, no matter the reason, increases the tax burden for law-abiding citizens, especially wage earners and the middle class. By collecting taxes at the point of purchase, the fair tax substantially reduces the billions in uncollected taxes resulting from noncompliance, confusion, and honest mistakes. The fair tax reduces tax evasion and lowers the burden on law-abiding taxpayers.
The fair tax is unlikely to affect the amount of illegal immigration or legal immigration, in fact, that goes on today. What it will do is it will capture taxes from illegal immigrants that today may not file income tax forms and pay the federal income tax. In addition, you have to be a legal U.S. resident to be able to get the prebate. So if you want to be exempt from taxes on your essential goods and services, you're going to have to be a legal resident. So if I was an illegal resident in the United States under the fair tax, I would not only have to pay tax, but if I wanted the benefit of the prebate, I would actually have to become a citizen to get that. So I think it's going to have a very good effect on our system vis-a-vis illegal immigrants. Americans could cross the border and not pay the fair tax, but why would they do that if there's not an advantage to doing that? Once we remove the embedded cost of the corporate income tax, the payroll tax, and the compliance cost, if the good or service costs about the same as it does today under the fair tax, why would we cross the border to go buy that that purchase across the border when it's going to be the same cost as it is today under the fair tax. So I don't really see any benefit to doing that. The same thing is with state to state. Since all the states are going to have the same income fair tax, sales tax, there's going to be no benefit to going across a state line to purchase a good, or going across an international border to purchase a good. Under the fair tax, used goods are not subject to the national sales tax. And the reason why they're not is that that would be double taxation. Imagine you bought a new car and you paid the sales tax or the fair tax on your new car, and you turned around and sold it the next day. Well, you've already paid the tax for that car. So now that tax is embedded in the price of that car. And if you sell that car for a little less than you bought it the day before, you're going to recoup that tax back to you, the person who paid it. So the person who buys the used product is not going to pay the government another round of tax on that car. They're going to pay you, and you're going to recoup the tax you paid. So not taxing used goods is a way to prevent double taxation, which in the fair tax, we never want to double or triple tax any money.
As a sales tax, the fair tax taxes what we consume, not what we produce. It taxes what we take, not what we make. A wealthy person buying an expensive luxury car pays more taxes than someone buying an economy car. And since everyone takes home their whole paycheck, they're able to afford a better car. Someone who buys a used car pays no federal tax. The fair tax taxes goods only one time, when they are originally purchased. All used goods are free of federal taxes.
Well, in fact, in charitable giving, people generally give out of compassion because they want to support an entity, not solely for the tax deduction. But those that give for the tax deduction, they are also more advantaged under the fair tax than the current system. Again, if you give a contribution to a charity today, you've already paid tax on that money that you give to them. It's a post or after payroll tax dollar that you give. And then you can deduct that amount in some cases and up to some amounts from your income tax. Great news. Under the fair tax, you can give as much money as you want tax-free, and the money you give has not been taxed, so you actually have more money to give. So much like the home building market or the home purchase market, charities are likely to benefit greatly under the fair tax.
Again, if there is no income tax, there are no tax deductions. However, research has shown that charitable contributions are more related to the health of the economy than to tax benefits. When people have more money, they give more money. Moreover, people give to charity based more on a desire to help than on the ability to take a deduction. 2 of every 3 taxpayers do not itemize today, so they get no tax benefit whatsoever for their charitable contributions or for the home mortgage deduction.
Well, it's real easy. We are de-taxing work and repealing the payroll tax. So when you repeal the payroll tax, the business can decide to lower the price of their product with that money, or they can increase the payroll of their employee with that money. There's also, on top of the payroll tax savings, the compliance cost savings and the corporate income tax savings that can be distributed to shareholders, to price of the product, to the salary of the worker. Different products and different services will have different price decreases, just as different workers in different sectors of the economy will have different increases in their take-home pay. How that shakes out, competition will tell us. In industries that have very tight labor markets, where they're really searching for employees, you're likely to see much bigger increases in salaries. In other industries, you're going to see huge decreases in the prices of products when they have plenty of people to produce their goods. So it's impossible to say economy-wide how that shakes out, but for each individual sector of the economy, each individual good and service, you're going to see that benefit manifested. Primarily by simplicity. I mean, the great thing about the fair tax is everybody's taxed at one rate and there's no exemptions or exclusions. Therefore, if somebody wants to change the rate, it has to be changed on all of us, so all of us can get together and object to that, as opposed to the divide and conquer, and we say, well, we're just going to raise the rate on this group of people or this group of people. And the same thing with exemptions and exclusions. The first one that comes up is going to be very visible to everyone, unlike today when they can hide exemptions, exclusions, and deductions in a very complex tax code. It's just going to be obvious. So transparency is really our best protection against having this tax system eroded into something we don't like. Corporations don't enjoy a windfall from the fair tax. The consumers and workers, the consumers of the product of the corporation and the workers in the corporation receive the windfall. Again, corporations don't pay taxes anyway. Corporations just collect taxes or pass on taxes. The customer always pays the tax, or the employee is paying the payroll tax. So if we abolish a corporate income tax, we don't help the corporation. We help prices go down for the people who buy the product for the corporation, and we help salaries and income of the people who work in the corporation. It will be very difficult for you to pretend to be a business to avoid the fair tax. In fact, today, in many states, businesses are exempt from paying those taxes as well, and they have very sophisticated means of ensuring that you are a business before you make a tax-free purchase. In fact, under the fair tax, there isn't a tax-free purchase. You actually, even if you're a business and you buy something in the retail level, you're going to pay the tax, and you're going to simply take it off the tax due or get a rebate from the state when you show them that you're a business. But what do you have to show? You have to show sales. You have to be a registered business. You have to actually be a business to be able to take advantage of that, and there's really very little way for you to fool the system into thinking you're an actual business when you aren't. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing money. It's the price of borrowing money. And when you have more of something, the price tends to go down. If we have lots of cars in America or lots of clothing, supply is big, prices tend to go down. If you don't have very many of them, prices go up. So when you don't tax savings anymore, and there's more savings, it's like having lots more cars or lots more clothes in the store, the price is going to go down. And the price in this case are interest rates. So we're likely to see significantly lower interest rates for both businesses and consumers. And what that does is it allows people to go out in a consumer level to make major purchases like cars and homes, or on a business level to borrow money to be able to have the business expand. And that's what drives the economy in America. Well, the retailers are going to be in a great position. The retailers today have the burden of the income tax system. They pay payroll tax, they pay their corporate income tax, they pay all their compliance costs. They're going to trade all those bad things, all those burdens, and they're going to trade that for collecting a sales tax and sending it in, which, by the way, 45 states out of 50 already do. They're actually going to be paid to do that. So from a retailer's perspective, internally, it's a huge benefit. Now, how about for their people who come to their store? Now their shoppers that come to their store are going to have their full paycheck. They're going to have before payroll tax dollars, income tax dollars, their whole paycheck. So you've got a customer with more money in their pocket and a customer that can borrow money less expensively. That's a pretty good customer to have if you're a retailer. So the retailers internally are benefited greatly, and then their customers are likely to be more aggressive buyers of those people's products. The fair tax, by its very nature, protects taxpayer rights and civil liberties because it's not intrusive. You pay when you spend. The money that you save and invest is yours, and no one tracks it. No one has any interest in knowing where that is or what you're doing with it. But in addition, the fair tax has, in law, strong taxpayer rights provisions so that if you ever do have a question or a problem with respect to the fair tax, that you have advocates for your side and you're able to get a fair hearing. Well, your question is how can we tax health care? And I guess my answer to you is, well, why don't you go ask Congress, because they tax it today. If you don't think there's the cost of the federal income tax in every single medical procedure that everyone undergoes today, from a heart transplant to a toenail removal, every one of those medical facilities pays payroll taxes on their employees. They pay income tax on their income. They pay compliance costs. In fact, the tax complications in the medical industry are legendarily complex. So all those are taxed today. What the fair tax asks of the tax system is, if you're going to tax something, let us see it. Make it transparent. Make it fair. We'd like to know how much we're paying. And so all we do is we say, let's do what we do today, but do it in a fair, simple, transparent way. Education is not taxed under the fair tax, and it's a pretty simple rule. We're not going to tax anything that is savings or investment. And education clearly is an investment in human capital. Just like if you made an investment and built a plant, and that would be an investment in a physical plant, we're not going to tax any investment in human capital, and that's clearly what education is. So education under the fair tax is not taxed. Government will be covered under the tax system, just as government is covered under the tax system today. They pay payroll tax on their employees, and much like a business today, they're going to be covered under the system, but there's no increase. You know, the fair tax is simply taking a tax system today that's embedded in all these areas of our economy, business and government and everywhere else, and it's bringing it to the surface and making it transparent so that we can all can see it. So that's really the major change. Well, we do exempt food and medicine from the fair tax by exempting all essential goods and services. What you asked is, well, why don't we just do it by category? Why don't we just exempt all food and all medicine, or all clothing or all shelter, because we all know those are essentials. The problem in doing that way, and it's not the best way to do it, is a couple of reasons. First, you might say, well, let's exempt clothing because we all need clothing. So this gentleman over here goes and buys a $3,000 suit, and you go buy some jeans and a t-shirt, and you're both going to receive an exemption of all taxes on those. Well, that sounds kind of regressive to me, because the wealthier person is getting quite a lot of benefit, a lot more than you, exemption from the sales tax than you are. So the second thing, the second reason why that's not a good way to do it is because it lends itself to lobbying and gaming, because everyone is going to try to get a law passed saying that their special good or service, it needs to go into this exempt category. It's a food, champagne and caviar. Oh, well, that's food. Let's get all that exempt. And that's going to also make it more complex, and it's also going to make it more regressive. So the simplest and fairest way to do it is simply exempt all purchases up to the poverty level and not do it by category. The states are affected in only one way, although I think that they will probably alter their tax systems to accommodate the fair tax more completely. The main way they're affected is that the retailers in the state will collect the tax and they will pass it on to the state taxing authorities, who will then pass it on to the federal government. Since both the retailer and the state authority is paid for that service, there's not going to be a net disincentive for the state to do that. They're going to be paid for that. Now, what will probably happen is that states that have income taxes, because those generally piggyback off the federal income taxes, will probably reconsider those. And they will probably say, we'd rather just accommodate for the fair tax by having a state sales tax rather than our income tax. State income taxes were created around the federal income tax, so I imagine the states will do the same thing now that there's a national sales tax and have state sales taxes. And a lot of the same benefits that the federal system will get from a sales tax will then come to the states. Well, there are many significant economies that use a sales tax as a foundation for their tax system, and that's 45 of the United States. In fact, Texas and Florida, two of the biggest economies in the world, are driven primarily by sales taxes and don't have income taxes. I haven't found an example of a country that has had an exclusively a federal sales tax as their source of revenue, but we know it works as a system because large economies already run on it. And to be honest, some of the other countries that have sales taxes that are often criticized for their tax system are primarily criticized because they have, in addition to the sales tax, a whole host of other taxes, including VATs or income taxes, that really burden their tax system. So the best example of sales taxes that work, and for people to have confidence that these systems work, are right here on our own shores, because most of us pay them every day. It's far riskier to keep a federal income tax system that's crippling our economy than it is to move to a simple, transparent, fair sales tax that we already use all across the country today. Well, anyone who prepares a personal income tax or a corporate income tax for a living will be no longer needed because there won't be any of those filings. But for people that are accountants and even people that are the tax preparers that have skills in financial management, there's going to be even more work than ever. If you think about it, every American is going to take home their whole paycheck and have to make decisions about how to manage that money. And these are the very kinds of people that can help them do that. When you fix our trade tax problem, and we have lots of businesses coming here to produce, there's going to be a whole new round of work for people that are good at accounting and financial management as well. So I don't think there's going to be any shortage of jobs for people that are good at that, but that specific role of preparing and filing income tax returns for a person or a corporation is going to go away.
To ensure that the income tax goes away and stays away, the FairTax Plan includes the repeal of the 16th Amendment, a prohibition of any future income tax, and the end of the IRS. In fact, the FairTax is the only plan that explicitly prohibits the government from reestablishing any income tax.
The FairTax abolishes the IRS for good. There's no more reason for it. We don't need an intrusive federal bureaucracy doing audits, monitoring people's income. The beauty of the FairTax is that it's simple, it's transparent, the tax is collected on the local level. The FairTax bill mandates that the IRS will be abolished by 2009. It also orders it to destroy the records that is kept on Americans all these many years. So it is a true abolishment of the Internal Revenue Service because it's no longer needed. The FairTax assumes that government spending and government income remain the same. If they don't, the government has to adjust its books for that, but it has really no impact on the FairTax. The FairTax, as we've said before, is designed to be revenue neutral, which means to raise the same amount of money out of the economy as is raised today. Well, during the transition between an income tax and the FairTax, the average taxpayer will just experience a far simpler world. They will no longer have to keep all their income tax records. They'll no longer have to worry about April 15th and filing an income tax form. They will see tremendous economic benefits surrounding them. They'll see interest rates coming down. They'll see the prices of their products, even with the FairTax included, not be inflationary. And they'll see much more economic opportunity all around them. On a personal basis, they'll just be relieved from the burdens that we have in our current income tax system. There's very little transition needed on the part of an individual other than enjoying the benefits. That's one of the great things about the FairTax.
Besides simplifying the tax code, the FairTax expands home ownership, ignites new job creation, untaxes the poor, generates new sources of revenue for the overall economy, enhances global competitiveness, and fosters increased charitable giving. The FairTax is an idea whose time has come. Nearly 700,000 people have joined the FairTax grassroots movement. Their numbers are growing, and so are their voices.
And it's not just a poor versus rich question. It's about what's fair and all the people that don't pay basically their fair share of taxes. So it really strikes a chord. It hits people where they live, and in America it's all about being fair.
I don't think our founding fathers really had that in mind when they said, let's control our constituents by giving them a tax on their income. Karl Marx said that.
I've always been one of those folks that looked at my paycheck and I looked at how much taxes were being withheld from my paycheck every month. When I was raising 3 teenagers and we would file our taxes every year, I realized that everything I was working was paying our family tax debt. I mean, I was working exclusively to pay our family taxes. So, when you think that I could have been a stay-at-home mom, and all the other families out there can do the same thing.
I don't have enough money to move it offshore. I don't have enough money to protect it. I don't have enough money to hire big expensive lawyers. I take it right on the chin with millions of other people.
What I like about the fair tax is the fact that it not only eliminates payroll taxes, which is a benefit for us because we have a small trucking company, but I also like the fact that we won't have any payroll taxes, or we won't have to pay as many taxes out for ourselves, and we can increase pay to our drivers in exchange, because we won't have to pay out extra, and they can have more benefits, and we can have increased revenue at the same time.
As someone who has a degree in government and I'm a student of history, I see what it might take is actually getting to the point where enough people believe in it that any congressman, any senator that is not in favor of it just gets voted out of office. It may be that simple. If you call that a rebellion, I call people taking back the government. It's more in line with what the original Constitution was.
It's an idea that unless you understand it, unless you can get your mind around it, you're not going to buy into it. You're going to say it doesn't make sense. That's the first answer I get from everybody I bring the idea up to. It's going to take education. It's going to take people talking to their friends. It's going to take, really a movement of people just sitting with people, talking to them, telling them, hey, this is what it's about, and explaining it. And then it's going to take some attention from the media, because the media has to catch on to, hey, we've got to educate people. You need mass media to educate people about this, because if you educate people, it's a no-brainer. It's going to pass.
Would you be in favor of a fair tax, which is a retail sales tax, so it would spread that pain more evenly across society, and people would literally have the option of opting out in a way?
Yeah. Well, look, the fair tax is. I'm a supporter of tax simplification and tax fairness. The fair tax is the fairest way to do that and the best, and so I'm a long-time supporter of the fair tax. Now, there's a political impediment to it, and that means the abolition of the income tax. I mean, if you pass a fair tax but you don't get rid of the income tax in the Constitution, you're going to end up having both at some point.
Right.
So I think that has to happen first, and I would be supportive of that. But I have always supported the fair tax, continue to support the fair tax. I think it's the best of all the plans that are out there. Not sure if it has the political support yet in Washington. We got to keep working on it. But I do believe that within our lifetime, and I mean within the near future, we will have an opportunity in this country to do something like the fair tax if we continue to educate people on it. I know the polls show that the majority of people don't support it, but here's the truth. I have never met anybody who, after I explain the fair tax to them, are not convinced that it's better than what we have right now. But you got to explain it to them, because otherwise it's mischaracterized as a tax increase. For example, here in Florida, when I was Speaker, I wanted to eliminate the property tax and give every county the option of replacing it with a sales tax instead of it, because I think a consumption tax is a much fairer tax than a property tax or an income tax. Today, Charlie Crist and his campaign used that against me. They say, well, Marco Rubio wanted to raise your sales tax. Of course, they ignore that I wanted to abolish the property tax. That's the same attack they use against the fair tax. So there's some education that has to continue to go on before I think the fair tax is ready to go, but I do support it.
16 years ago, when I was a Republican primary candidate for president, I called for scrapping the income tax and the IRS and putting in its place a national consumption tax on the final sale of goods and services. There were no senators then supporting the idea, and only a couple of House members. I made the point at the time that presidential leadership was required to improve our job-creating economic growth prospects, and that pulling out the existing tax code by root and branch was the way to do it. Now, with election of a Republican House and hopes in 2012 to gain Republican control of the Senate and the election of a Republican president, I believe we have another chance to fundamentally change the tax code. This is extremely important, because our current low-growth era is accompanied by high deficits. We need to think creatively about achieving dynamic growth while simultaneously exercising fiscal restraint. A pro-growth tax code is the first and best step forward to doing so. Since 1997, when I first introduced a resolution promoting the replacement of the income tax, several people have advanced the idea to develop the fair tax. The current bill is supported by 60 members in the House, including Hoosiers Dan Burden, Marlin Stutzman, and announced gubernatorial candidate Congressman Mike Pence. I congratulate Senator Saxby Chambliss for his leadership in introducing this bill in the Senate, which is also supported by Senators Burr, Coburn, Cornyn, DeMint, Isaacson, and Moran. Today, I add my name as a co-sponsor for the fair tax. In the century prior to 1970, excluding the Great Depression, our economy grew at an annual rate of 4%. Since 1970, our economy has grown only at an annual rate of 2.8%. Without strong growth, new jobs are not created, wages are not increased, and wealth for all Americans will not grow. The fair tax fundamentally alters our prospects as a nation. Savings will increase, and therefore individuals and American companies will have more money to invest in job-creating growth, and companies around the globe will rush to invest here as well. This dynamic economic growth will expand federal revenue without an increased tax burden on Americans. This approach is not only fair, but transparent, with no more hidden tax benefits to special interests. The 2% of our GDP, or $300 billion, that Americans now pay just to understand and to comply with the complex income tax code will be saved. This would save money for millions of families and eliminate tax season aggravation. And moreover, individuals who currently pay almost no federal taxes, including foreign tourists, illegal aliens, and criminals, would pay federal taxes like everybody else. Since the 1990s, the work of economists Larry Kotlikoff and now David Turk have continued to inform the debate to end the tax on income. Neil Bortz and former Congressman John Linder's writings and leadership have brought the idea to many millions of Americans. They point out in their bestseller, The Fair Tax Book, that low-income workers will be better off. They will no longer have Social Security and Medicare taxes withheld from their paychecks. To ensure that low-wage earners are not being taxed on necessities, all families of citizens and legal residents with a valid Social Security card would receive a tax rebate to cover taxes on basic expenditures. For a family of four, this would be $500 a month. The current tax code warps household and business decisions, discourages investment, is constantly evaded, is arduous to enforce, and is disconnected from economic realities. In short, it is fitting hand in glove with big government spending to punch the life out of our economy. Many Americans fear that our country is going bankrupt and will lose our preeminent position in the world. This does not need to be so, and will not be, if we adopt the fair tax and end the inherently flawed federal income tax system.